Tim and I first met right here in Birmingham in 1971, when we were both shortlisted candidates for the same job. Tim got the job. But he always maintained that the only reason he got it was that I turned up at the interview wearing a sort of claret-coloured suit that was rather too advanced sartorially for Vera Adams' taste. Well, I'm sure he was wrong. He got the job because he was the better candidate. But he was actually quite right about the suit. And if you've ever heard him ribbing me about it, which he did frequently, you would have got a working definition of the verb to chortle. The way he laughed will ring in my ears, and I think most of all our ears, forever. Anyway, we next met 9 years later at Colchester, I think it was, a Selness event, a one-day conference, and I was working for the British Council. And because I was on a committee to computerise the library catalogues, I got anything to do with computers sent to my desk, and I went along, and it was utterly inspiring. He was demonstrating 3 programs there, I think: Jumbler, Flasher, Masker. Masker eventually turned into a wonderful Spectrum program called TextBag, which is actually listed in our book. And also it's one I took to its logical extreme, and I did a program of my own called Eclipse. Now, other people who were working in CALL, computer-assisted language learning, which I don't know what we called it in those days, it wasn't CALL yet, but they regarded play as something just for motivation. You've got your students to work through a very dull exercise, so let them play a game at the end to reward them. But Tim didn't do it that way. Tim actually got the play to be the learning. You played to learn. And he introduced another one, rather novel idea in those days, that you got students to wager, possibly virtual counters, not real money, but to wager on their expectation of an answer being right. How confident were they? A lovely idea. And I think it was picked up also by Chris Jones, who also produced this nice notion that a student hasn't necessarily lost interest in a quiz question when they've got the right answer. They may still be interested to know why the other answers were wrong. And I put this back to Tim later with a slogan: the computer puts the trial back into trial and error. And we worked on that one together. And even in those days, he was working on principles which would become very relevant to the concordance work, for which he really made into something so special. Even that, in his very first paper, with the Selness paper from this event, he talked about blurring the distinction between research programs and teaching and learning programs. And there's a copy of that paper here, which anyone, Gail very kindly reproduced a few, so help yourself if you're interested. That was, I think, probably his first published paper on anything to do with computing. In 1982, the British Council gave me a year off. They called it a training year. And I grabbed the opportunity to spend it in Birmingham, working with Tim. And then we were approached by Annette Capel of Collins to do a book together. When we completed it, some of Tim's colleagues asked me, "How did you get a book out of Tim?" We've been trying for years. And the answer, of course, is I kidnapped him. He came back over the Christmas vacation, living in our flat in Essex with my family. And every morning, we went into separate rooms and spent the morning drafting sections of the book. We met at noon, exchanged our typescripts, looked through them, lunch, then we had a long discussion about we went through line by line, discussing things, then we repeated the whole process. And that way, in about 10 days, we got half the book completed. Which was pretty good. Up to about there, yes. But it was half. The other half consisted actually of program listings. And these we could only produce individually, annotated listings. And of course they're now for the of minority interest, because they were all for the Sinclair Spectrum. But the book was eventually published. Thank you, Annette, for putting that our way. And it was, I think, quite influential at the time. In fact, I've got a bundle of reviews somewhere, including quite a few reviews written by people in this room. Right. Tim was a first-rate programmer, he really was. His software didn't crash by the time it got into students' hands. The front ends were unglamorous, but easy to use. And all the activities were riveting. In the days of the 1K ZX81, remember the 1K ZX81? Conciseness was a supreme virtue. And Tim achieved more with 1K than could seem possible nowadays. I remember he wrote something called S-ending. How to put an S onto a noun or a verb, a regular noun or verb. Here it is. Enter any word, real or nonsense, and the computer would inflect it.
Yeah.
That much code, and according to the rules of English. Of course, maybe it didn't quite get everything right. I think it would have got stomachs wrong. but otherwise, no. And then we went to Paris for a conference. I think it was December 1981, or no, it must be 82. Went to Paris, and we were talking about this sort of program. And I remember I challenged him: could you do the same thing for putting a or an in front of a noun? And he did it overnight. It was there at breakfast the next morning, done. And there is the A as. And it was sensitive enough, even in 1K of code, to distinguish between an hour and a hurry, an uninformed man or a uniformed man, a one-horse town and an onion. It would have got all those right. We both enjoyed in those days writing for a rather forgotten machine now called the New Brain. And the special pleasure that Tim had with this one was that it had something called Boolean string assignment. You could actually put into the middle of a string flags for gender, number, tense, things like that. And Tim used to say, this would let you write a complete grammar of English in one line of code. He was exaggerating a little. I think my favourite of Tim's programmes is Context. There are examples of that around here, which derived, of course, from the concordance work, and asking students, in fact, to work out the missing word from a number of concordance citations. When I worked on my own Eclipse programme, and we produced a T-shirt for Eclipse. And inspired by this, Tim produced his own T-shirt for Context. Here we are. And this spells out, well, you could work it out fairly easily, but it's, there's a message there in these 5 blocks, a 5-word message. And it turned out we went through our cupboards, we found we had 2 of these, so I've talked to Gail and Geoffrey, and what we'll do at the end of the session, Geoffrey, or yes, is auction one of these for a contribution to Tim's fund. So anyway, there's a pleasure in store, wasn't it? Anyway, but the Context, I think, is a splendid program. I wish that, I don't know if anyone's ever done a Windows version of it. It deserves to come back, I think, into use. But there were so many other little gems. There was a wonderful little program called 2 Sticks. The computer randomly drew out 2 lines labelled A and B, and then generated a sentence, which could be something, A is much longer than B, or A and B are the same length, or A is a little bit shorter, or B is not quite as long as A. And all the student had to do was press T for true and F for false. And we call that receptive drill, because what you're seeing is a lot of pattern similar sentences, but you're having to think about the meaning. You're not just, it's not like mindless, tum-ti-tum, that's Julian Dakin. I think he would have got that from Julian Dakin, the tum-ti-tum effect. This was, if you like, eschewing the tum, getting rid of the tum-ti-tum effect. You're thinking about what this means all the time. There was a lovely little program called Loan. You typed in a sum of money, and the computer generated a request to borrow that much money. So if you put in £50, it would give you, I wonder if you could see your way to letting me have £50. If you put in 10p, it's got 10p on you. And of course what the student had to do was work out what were the boundaries, how much more money before it changed to a different form. And of course it wasn't really, if you like, test the computer testing the student, it was the student testing the computer. Has it got it right? Go and talk to the other students and find, is this what we actually do? Talk to your teacher. Is this roughly, would it be at over £1 that we suddenly can't say, got a pound on you? Where are the boundaries? Of course, they would vary over time with inflation. But, so the computer was imitating a human behaviour, and what the learner had to do was not to imitate it, but to judge it. And I think, again, another case of putting the trial back into trial and error. And of course, what this also led to was students getting interested. How is the trick done? And they asked to look at the listings. They actually wanted to find out how the code was written. As I've already said, Tim was extraordinarily clever, but he was clever in a way that made nobody else feel stupid. We all felt cleverer than we probably are when we were with Tim. He shared everything with us. His insights were to be shared. We've had this word sharing already. It's really a key one for him. His insights were to be shared with and delighted over. And perhaps that's one reason he didn't really publish very much. He wanted to get it into the hands of people as fast as possible. And his awful lot of Tim's inspiration all around us, I think it'll go on like that. I'm sure it's how you'd have wanted it. Thanks.